In this video, we'll be going over some of the best magic items you might consider to take to help enhance your experience as a ranger. With their ability to use a wide array of weapons and armor, barring heavy armor, rangers sport a strong variety of gameplay options, which means that there are plenty of magic items for them to make use of. And with that out of the way, let's get started. And starting off at number 10, we have a potentially familiar item in the Amulet of Health from the DMG. This is a rare necklace that requires attunement and comes with the simple effect of setting the wearer's constitution score to 19, assuming it isn't already that high in the first place. While constitution is widely accepted as the worst stat to target for enemies, this isn't true for player characters. For players, the constitution stat tends to fly under the radar when compared to many other stats, since things like strength can influence your ability to be athletic, and charisma can influence your ability to persuade or deceive creatures you talk to. Constitution, on the other hand, has no skills associated with it directly, so it's usually not deemed as an important stat in comparison, other than to increase your hit points when you build your character and level up based on your constitution modifier, or to better maintain concentration whenever you have to make a concentration check as a result of taking damage. However, while there aren't any skill checks associated with the stat itself, there are plenty of saves that would allow you to make constitution saving throws. Protecting yourself against certain weather conditions like extreme heat or cold usually call for a constitution saving throw to not take points of exhaustion. Another use of your constitution score is the ability to better make constitution saving throws against spells that would call for it, just like any other stat, but also to help counteract the effects of poisons that your character might befall throughout your travels. And while there aren't any actual rules for it, some DMs also use your character's constitution save to determine the effects of alcohol, where if you fail, you might become buzzed, drunk, or otherwise black out, depending on the severity of the failure. Constitution is always that one stat that everyone is aware exists and acknowledges its overall importance, but doesn't actually do anything cool that stands out from the rest of them. That being said, the Amulet of Health does a great job at making your constitution feel more important and noticeable, as your ranger with a +2 to their con modifier suddenly gets a +4 mod, and twice their level as extra hit points. So now they're suddenly looking less hittable. Now, your ranger is able to face tank a couple of hits on the front lines or survive multiple light knockouts in the back line. On top of that, because concentration checks are a factor of your constitution modifier, having a 19 in your constitution score makes it so that you can pass concentration checks a lot more often, especially at lower levels where it tends to be more common for you to make DC 10 concentration checks as a result of lower damage coming from the enemy. This can be invaluable for maintaining things like Hunter's Mark, a ranger staple that requires concentration and lasts a minute, allowing him to deal an extra 1d6 damage every time they hit with their weapon, as well as make it easier to track the creature's movement, so that you can maintain damage uptime with your fellow party members, since, as a half caster, having less spell slots overall means maintaining your uptime with concentration spells is that much more important as a result. That being said, however, the Amulet of Health doesn't take a higher spot on this list, because that's really all it does. While it is very useful as a means to make better survival or concentration checks, there are plenty of magic items that can do a lot more than the Amulet of Health, which is why it only takes number 10 spot on this list. And at number 9, we have the Blood Fury tattoo from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. This tattoo is legendary and requires attunement by holding the needle to your skin and pressing it there throughout the attunement process in order to gain the benefits of using the Bloodthirsty Strikes ability. Bloodthirsty Strikes allows you to expend 1 of 10 of the tattoo's charges and either instantly deal 4d6 extra necrotic damage to a creature you hit with a weapon attack while regaining hit points equal to the necrotic damage you deal, or you can use your reaction whenever a creature you can see damages you in order to make a melee attack against the creature with advantage. Both benefits are really good, although the second benefit only really applies to rangers that are using melee weapons rather than ranged ones. However, as a ranged attacker, the first benefit still applies, as you can just keep your distance from enemies, pelting them with 4d6 necrotic damage up to twice a turn with extra attack. And if you're a Gloomstalker, your Dread Ambusher subclass feature allows you to make an additional weapon attack on your first turn of combat, which can end up being an extra 12d6 necrotic damage right off the bat. Overall, this magic item is a huge damage increase that scales very well as a legendary item you might be able to get starting at 17th level, that is definitely worth considering on this list, and only at the 9th spot considering that the only real downside of this item is what we just mentioned, it requiring such a high level to obtain, as well as having limited uses from only 10 charges. However, this is remedied by the fact that these charges do recharge every day at dawn, so don't be afraid to spam the Blood Fury tattoo to your heart's content. And at number 8, we have the Bracers of Archery from the DMG. These are an uncommon tier bracers that require attunement in order to gain the very simple benefit of dealing an additional +2 bonus to your damage rolls whenever you make a ranged attack with a longbow or shortbow, as well as granting you proficiency in either if you don't already have it. Ever wanted to be an archer on a class that doesn't get to use longbows, such as a rogue? Well, if you attune to these bracers, that is no longer a problem. However, as a ranger, you already have proficiency in either, so you would only be gaining the benefit of an extra +2 damage to all of your range attacks, so long as you're using the required weapon, of course. Sadly, the bracers don't cover crossbows, guns, or other ranged weapons, but you technically don't need it to when you're dealing an extra +4 damage per round starting at 5th level with extra attack. While this bonus damage does seem quite small, it does add up over time and can even help finish off creatures that would otherwise survive with 1 or 2 hit points if you didn't have that bonus damage. And since this is an uncommon item, you can obtain these bracers extremely early in the game. It might even be one of the very first magic items you come across. Another way you can look at this item is that it grants your bow the damage of a +2 weapon, which you don't even get until rare items start becoming available. And even then, the Bracers of Archery would stack with those weapons as well. That being said, however, the reason why the Bracers of Archery only take the number 8 spot on this list is because while +2 damage to all your range attacks with a short or longbow does tend to add up early on, this damage is pretty minuscule at later tiers of play, where much better attunement options become available, like the aforementioned Blood Fury tattoo. However, the Bracers of Archery do take a slightly higher spot than the tattoo due to how readily available they are in comparison, so you would technically get way more use out of the Bracers of Archery. And at number 7, we have the Animated Shield from the DMG. This is a very rare shield that requires attunement and allows you to gain the protection of the shield while having both your hands occupied. Essentially, you speak its command word as a bonus action to animate the shield and have it hover in the air around your space, acting as if you were wielding it and granting you the normal +2 AC bonus of the shield, while leaving your hands totally free to do whatever you want with them. This magic item is a solution to having your cake and eating it too for any character that wields two-handed weapons. This holds especially true for rangers that are using great swords, great axes, any versatile weapon, any bows, or any other weapon which requires two hands to use, since it means they get to have a free bonus to their AC, making them that much harder to hit overall. While the Animated Shield is considered a very rare item, it's kind of hard to find magic items that give bonuses to AC that aren't the Cloak of Protection or Ring of Protection, both of which do provide a +1 bonus to AC each, but require 2 attunement slots if you want that +2 bonus total. With the Animated Shield, however, you technically get to have that +2 bonus at the price of 1 attunement slot. Of course, you could stack the Ring and Cloak of Protection for a total of a +4 bonus to your AC, which can be very funny for a ranger with a high enough dexterity to take advantage of, say, +3 studded leather armor. However, spending 3 attunement slots for that sort of AC bonus does come with the downside of not having anything that helps your utility, roleplay, or overall damage as a ranger. So if it comes down to making a choice, the Animated Shield is definitely the go-to option, leaving you with more attunement slots overall, while providing the same amount of protection as the Cloak and Ring of Protection. As for why the Animated Shield only takes number 7 on this list, it's mostly for the reasons you'd expect. The only thing this item provides is a flat +2 bonus to your AC, which is only one aspect of combat. Sure, not being hit is nice, but it doesn't really do much for you in the long run. And for a very rare item, a +2 bonus to your AC isn't exactly that great compared to other items you can get at that tier, especially for rangers. However, if your DM is nice enough to apply the Animated Shield effect to a +3 shield you own or find, then this item is definitely one of the best you can have, as spending 1 attunement slot for a +5 bonus to your AC with no downside is extremely powerful. But alas, we have to rank the item as is, and so the Animated Shield remains on the lower half of this list as a result. And at number 6, we have the Cloak of Displacement from the DMG. This is a rare cloak that requires attunement and makes it so that any attack roll against you has disadvantage while wearing it. This is extremely useful for any class. especially for rangers that want to be all over the place. Forcing disadvantage on enemies basically means that you're much harder to hit on the front lines, which can protect you from being the primary focus, since having disadvantage on all your attack rolls can be a very exhausting situation when the barbarian that just used reckless attacks is right there. Even if the barbarian halves a creature's damage, it feels much better knowing you're going to actually hit something in the first place. If you're more of a range build, however, then having the Cloak of Displacement might not be as useful, but it does come with some benefits of allowing you to dodge that stray arrow or firebolt headed your way to try and whittle you down from afar. While this might encourage creatures to try to bum rush you, forcing enemies into unfavorable positions is a tactical maneuver that helps your party all on its own, since now that enemy is further into your backlines, where it'd be harder for them to get out if they need to. Unfortunately, this item only takes number 6 spot on this list because, while they do get a lot of benefits from wearing the Cloak of Displacement, rangers don't nearly pull it off as well as like a barbarian or fighters can. Barbarians can already have a ton of damage, so making it harder to hit them or canceling enemy advantage after pulling off a reckless attack is incredible to have. Meanwhile, fighters love making a ton of attacks at once, so making sure they don't get hit or take damage helps them going on the front lines longer, so they don't spend their turn healing, dashing, or otherwise disengaging from a fight as they take damage. Rangers aren't as frontline savvy as their fighter counterparts, despite being able to frontline, since they tend to wait to maintain concentration on spells like Spike Growth or Entangle, two very good spells to have on deck. Spike Growth is a 2nd level concentration spell that lasts for up to 10 minutes and creates thorny terrain that counts as difficult terrain and a 20-foot radius at a point you can see on the ground within range of 150 feet. Whenever a creature moves into or within the area, they take 2d4 piercing damage for every 5 feet it travels. Creatures also can't see the terrain as hazardous unless they make a perception check to recognize the hazard before entering it. The 2d4 piercing damage is not really a lot of damage to deal, but this damage very quickly adds up when a creature is moving through the entire area. And since a creature can be forced to move through it and still take damage, there's plenty of combos you can pull off with this. But that isn't what this video is about, so that might have to wait to another time. Entangle, meanwhile, is a 1st level concentration spell that creates grasping vines and weeds in a 20-foot square on the ground, starting from a point within 90 feet, and restrains creatures inside the area if they fail a strength saving throw. That creature is restrained until the duration of 1 minute ends, or until they use their action in order to free themselves from the vines if they succeed a strength check. So, now that we've talked about a couple of examples of why it's important for a ranger to maintain concentration on their spells, it should become more apparent why the Cloak of Displacement might not have as much of an impact as it would for a fighter or a barbarian. At least, not while in the front lines. In the back lines, creatures are always going to want to try and break your concentration, so they might fire stray arrows or spells your ways to try and take damage and force your concentration checks. However, if you never get hit in the first place, then there is no concentration check to be made in the first place. That being said, however, there are 2 downsides to having the Cloak of Displacement, which prevents it from being higher on this list than it already is, which is the fact that any damage shuts off the cloak. So if a creature hits you with a magic missile or saving throw spell that still deals damage on a successful save, then your cloak just doesn't work until the start of your next turn. And if you happen to become incapacitated, restrained, or otherwise unable to move, then the cloak also shuts off. While the Cloak of Displacement is considered one of the more powerful magic items in the game, especially as a rare item nonetheless, this inherent weakness is a big enough downside that if your DM knows their way around it, there's a decent chance that you just don't get to benefit from the cloak. Even then, it's very easy to shut it off accidentally by a stray fireball or burning hands if you're unlucky or unfortunate enough to be in the area of effect of either spell at any given time. Still, the Cloak of Displacement remains as one of the best items you can take as a ranger regardless, even if it's only at the number 6 spot on this list. And at number 5, we have the Ring of Invisibility from the DMG. This is a legendary ring that requires attunement to gain the benefit of being able to turn invisible as an action whenever you want. Anything you're wearing or carrying also becomes invisible, and it functions just like the invisibility spell, where if you attack or cast a spell, you become visible again. Other than that, however, you can remain invisible for as long as you want, or until you remove the ring or use a bonus action to end the invisibility. Rangers are a bit of a hybrid class that takes a little bit from other classes, taking the combat capabilities of fighters, the nature-y spellcasting of druids, and the stealth-like nature of rogues, and rolling them all into what we know as the ranger class. That being said, the Ring of Invisibility is definitely a great way to enhance a ranger's stealth-like capabilities. This holds especially true since rangers that want to be more stealth-based can take the optional feature Candy, which was introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything along with a plethora of other optional features rangers can take, to gain expertise in stealth, and becomes a much better stealth user than any rogue when combined with the spell Pass Without Trace, a second level concentration spell that lasts up to 1 hour, and provides an aura of shadows and silence to radiate around you, granting you and your allies a +10 bonus to their stealth so long as they remain within 30 feet of you, while also making it so that you leave no tracks at all, and can't be tracked by anything other than through magical means. In other words, if you cast Pass Without Trace and then become invisible with a Ring of Invisibility, then there is effectively nothing in the world that could ever find you, since your stealth would be so incredibly high that even creatures with an extremely high perception stat won't be able to ever detect you. This allows you to scout out entire dungeons before actually tackling them in the safest way possible, or find the perfect spot to set up your first shot in battle as it breaks out. That being said, the reason the Ring of Invisibility takes number 5 on this list is because while it is a very strong competitor for being the best stealth-related item in the game, it does come with some harsh downsides, mainly being that it does cost an action to use. This means you can't really use it during combat unless you're willing to skip your attack action for that turn, which isn't really that useful unless you're really in a tight spot and need that invisibility to avoid taking fatal damage, and you're repositioning to a safer spot on the battlefield. Even then, the moment you cast any spell or make an attack, you're right back to being visible again. While having an on-demand invisibility spell that doesn't require concentration is nice to have, for a legendary magic item, we can do so much better, as you'll see later on in this list. In the meantime, let's go over our number 4 pick, the Winged Boots from the DMG. These uncommon tier boots require attunement and grant the user a flying speed equal to their walking speed for a total of 4 hours. These 4 hours can be broken into smaller increments, which will always use a minimum of 1 minute of that time. So if you only fly around for 1 round of combat, you'll still lose a minute of fly time from those boots. But if you spend 12 hours not using the boots at all, they regain 2 of those 4 hours back, allowing you to use them nearly infinitely if you're smart about it. While most classes are able to use the winged boots to get to places they normally couldn't, rangers make extraordinary use of the boots by being able to not only close gaps between them and an enemy on higher ground, but they can also keep out of range of any melee attackers if they're using a range build. So you can fly high into the air and pelt a Tarrasque until it either dies or runs away out of frustration that it can't reach you with any of its normal melee attacks. Rangers also love moving around the battlefield and making use of their surroundings more so than other martials, since they also have stealth capabilities they could potentially take advantage of. The fact that the winged boots are only an uncommon magic item makes them very accessible in the early parts of the game. So if you aren't already a race that's able to fly, these boots can remedy that quite easily if your DM allows it. Overall, a very simple item with some very big benefits considering how overpowered flying tends to be at lower levels, which makes it an excellent candidate for a high level spot in this list, at number 4. And at number 3, we have the Oathbow from the DMG. This very rare bow requires you to attune to it in order to receive its unique benefit of dealing a whopping 3d6 extra damage to your sworn enemy with every attack. You also have advantage on these attack rolls and ignore all forms of cover that isn't total cover while not suffering disadvantage from attacking from long range. And in order to determine who your sworn enemy is, you can speak the command phrase, "Swith death to you who have wronged me," whenever you make a ranged attack with the Oathbow. From there, the target becomes your sworn enemy for 7 days or until it dies, where you'll be able to make another creature a sworn enemy after the next dawn. The biggest downside of the bow, unfortunately, is the fact that it does only work on one enemy at a time, which isn't normally a problem if you focus down one creature or reserve the command word for a boss enemy. But no matter what enemy you choose, the Oathbow will absolutely decimate that singular creature without a doubt. The other downside of the Oathbow is the fact that for a very rare weapon, it doesn't come with any bonuses that you can make use of outside of your sworn enemy mechanic that it comes with. So it's typically better to reserve the Oathbow for when you really want to deal extra damage to something and just switch over to a +3 longbow for everything else. There aren't too many magical bows that rangers can make use of due to Wizards of the Coast not providing very many to begin with, but the Oathbow definitely stands out as a fantastic item, even if it's a bit niche. However, not even the Oathbow is safe from the power creep of the game, since there are bows that are even better than the Oathbow in general, such as the next entry on this list. And at number 2, we have Dragon's Wrath Weapon from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. This weapon can come in a variety of different forms, including a greatsword, shortbow, longbow, and pretty much any kind of weapon you can think of. As for what it does, the Dragon Wrath weapon essentially acts as a progression item throughout the campaign that you can strengthen by steeping it in a dragon's horde, causing it to absorb the energy of the Dragon's Breath weapon and becoming stronger overall. The weapon starts as an uncommon tier Slumbering Dragon's Wrath weapon, whose only effect is to deal 5 damage of the type dealt by the Dragon's Breath weapon that's attached to it whenever you roll a 20 on your attack roll with the weapon to every creature of your choice within 5 feet of the initial target. Once steeped into the horde of a young dragon, however, it ascends to becoming a Stirring Dragon's Wrath weapon, which has the same effect as before, but also becomes a +1 weapon that deals an extra 1d6 damage of the type of the Dragon's Breath weapon type. Steeping the weapon into an adult Dragon's Horde will ascend it to Waken status, where it becomes a +2 weapon that deals an extra 2d6 damage instead of 1d6, while also providing the wielder with its own flavor of breath weapon as an action, where they unleash a 30-foot cone of destructive energy from the weapon, which deals 8d6 damage of the type dealt by the Dragon's Breath weapon on a failed DC 16 dexterity saving throw, or half as much on a success. Sadly, you can only use this once per dawn, but it's an extra bit of utility you have at your disposal that you didn't have before. And as a ranger, having your own breath weapon that you can use when something gets too close can be a gut-wrenching experience for the enemy attacking you. Lastly, whenever you steep the weapon into an ancient dragon's horde, it becomes an Ascendant Dragon's Wrath weapon, making it a +3 weapon that deals an extra 3d6 damage instead of 2d6, while the breath weapon upgrades to a 60-foot cone that deals 12d6 damage on a DC 18 dexterity saving throw. While the Oathbow is a fantastic weapon to use against one particular enemy, the Dragon's Wrath weapon excels in accomplishing the same to every creature. While it might take some time to find an ancient dragon to kill and steep the weapon into its horde, the outcome is much more satisfying and generically useful overall, since you not only get to deal an extra 3d6 to every creature, you also gain the +3 bonus to attack and damage rolls that the Oathbow just doesn't get to have. And you get a breath weapon that deals a respectable amount of damage once per day. While you technically do get to have the Oathbow a little earlier than the Ascended version of the Dragon's Wrath weapon, even when you compare the Oathbow to the Stirring version of the weapon, which is the same rarity, the extra benefits of the Stirring Dragon's Wrath weapon are just too good to pass up in comparison. Yes, the Oathbow does allow you to ignore most forms of cover and ignore your disadvantage penalty when attacking from long range. If you're using a longbow version of the Dragon's Wrath weapon, chances are you're already taking feats like Sharpshooter to get those same benefits on everything anyway. Regardless, no matter how you look at it, the Oathbow just doesn't come close to the raw damage that the Dragon's Wrath weapon ends up being, while also making it a very fun progression item for your players to have. The only real downside is what you might expect. You need to have dragons present in your campaign, and potentially have a mini questline to make this weapon work the way it was meant to. But since the word dragon is included in the name of the tabletop game in the first place, there's usually a good chance that there will be a way to implement the Dragon's Wrath weapon into the campaign setting in some way, even if it's not a main focus of the campaign setting. So this magic item takes number 2 on this list as a result. And at number 1, we have the Cloak of Invisibility from the DMG. The Cloak of Invisibility is a legendary tier item that requires attunement, and is the result of what happens when you combine the power of the Ring of Invisibility with the functionality of the Wing Boots. To explain, the Cloak of Invisibility makes you, well, invisible, much like the Ring of Invisibility. However, while the Cloak doesn't let you become invisible indefinitely like the Ring does, it does have the same charge system as the Wing Boots, where you get to have 2 hours of invisibility time, rather than 4 hours from the Wing Boots, and recharge 1 hour of duration every 12 hours that you don't use the Cloak. However, despite this being on a timer, the Cloak is technically much better than the Ring of Invisibility, since attacking or casting spells does not break this invisibility like it would with the Ring. Essentially, the Ring of Invisibility grants you the benefits of the invisibility spell, while the Cloak of Invisibility grants you the benefits of greater invisibility, which works much better in combat, as you've probably guessed. Even with the 2 hours of use, a combat doesn't usually last more than a minute. So that's 120 potential combats that you can grant yourself greater invisibility for if you want to put the cloak's usefulness into perspective. While the Ring of Invisibility might be better for overall scouting due to its infinite duration, the Cloak of Invisibility could technically be better for some lighter scouting, since you can pivot to combat a lot more easily without being detected immediately due to the coming out of invisibility as a result of attacking or casting a spell like with the ring. And again, everything said about rangers with a Ring of Invisibility also applies here as well. Pass Without Trace and expertise in stealth just makes you impossible to find. And with a combination of both, combats would turn into an absolute joke if the enemy has no way to see through your invisibility, such as through special senses like Tremor Sense, Blind Sense, or True Sight. And since you won't need to use your action to go invisible, barring the first time you put your hood up as an action, you definitely get more value of the Cloak of Invisibility over its ring counterpart, which requires you to use an action to become invisible every time you break out of it. It's for this reason that the cloak not only takes a higher spot on this list than the Ring of Invisibility, but also why it takes the #1 spot. It has so many in and out of combat utility that it's just too good to pass up, especially as the sneakier archer build that everyone knows and loves.